Thank you for joining me today. My name is Hamed Hosseini. I'm a senior sociologist at the University of Newcastle, Australia, and I'm speaking from the lands of Abubakal and Woromai peoples. I pay my respect to my local indigenous elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here and watching later. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also wish to strongly condemn the humanitarian and ecological catastrophe in Gaza, finally recognized by a UN Commission of Inquiry on 16th of September 2025 as genocide committed by the Zionist state of Israel. The struggles for liberation and justice here and there are connected. Today, I'm going to discuss a few ideas out of my latest book, Capital Redefined, A Communist Value Theory for Liberating Life, co-authored with Barry K Gills, published in early 2024. At the heart of the book is a new framework called the Commonist Value Theory, as it is obvious from the subtitle. However, since the book is quite theory dense and abstract, it has become a mandate for me to explore how its concepts can be related and applied to different real world contexts. Ranging from the productive sectors like food, energy, housing, science, technology, and manufacturing to service sectors like healthcare, education, transport, arts, and recreation, etc., etc. For this presentation, I have chosen the case of food system just to make the theory more accessible. However, towards the end of the talk, when it comes to discussing the necessary measures to transform society and the economy, the scope becomes much wider. I will show that by reimagining value and comparing it with what value has become under capitalism, we will be able to reimagine our social and ecological life and liberate it from capitalism, supremacy, and coloniality. The new theory is admittedly a bit too intricate to fully unpack here, but the book is available as open access for those interested in exploring the theory in its own totality. So you can download it for free. You can also find several of my talks and presentations where I explain its ideas in simpler terms on my Spotify podcast and YouTube channels. I'll share the links below the recording of this presentation once it's posted on YouTube. For today, I'll focus mainly on two concepts from the book, true value and fetish value. We'll use this to think through how our value-making systems, for instance, in the case of food or more broadly agriculture, can be understood through this new lens and what insights this could offer for transformative real-world practices. To start, let me then first clarify what we mean by true value and fetish value here. True value is any quality that is necessary for the survival, well-living, and flourishing of all life, both human and non-human. It is not about money, price tags, or profit. Instead, true value is about the real, essential things that sustain us, our communities, and our ecosystems. True value is found in things that directly support and enrich life, such as clean air and water, healthy ecosystems, strong community bonds, collective knowledge, and acts of care, love, and solidarity. Think of a river. Under true value, it is drinkable water, a living ecosystem, flood protection, cultural meaning, and intergenerational security. However, under the capitalist value regime, it becomes a revenue stream. irrigation rights unevenly distributed in favor of giant agribusiness corporations involved in cash crops, bottled water, tourism, and hydropower, and the like. Under capitalism, the latter rises while the former is being erased. Profits up, fish dead. That's the contradiction we live inside. Now, so here is a distinction I want to hold for the rest of this talk. Fetish value is a kind of worth that capital recognizes because it can be captured and accumulated even when it undermines life. True value is normative and life anchored. It names the indispensable conditions for the survival and self-fulfillment of organized life, human and more than human. Clean air and stable climate, as we said before, reliable food and water, care, education, public health, trust, safety, and shared knowledge. These are not mere inputs to value. They are value. Once we see the two meanings side by side, everyday puzzles would make sense. Why aged care profits can rise while actual care declines. Why platforms boom while loneliness grows. Why can growth coincide with ecological loss? So the next question becomes, where does true value actually come from and how it is regenerated? Crucially, true value is created and regenerated through something we redefine as commoning. If true value is what sustains life, then we should look into how life sustains itself. Or in other words, to understand where true value comes from, we need to take our cue from the life domain, or what some people call the web of life. Living systems endure through renewal, reciprocity, respecting limits, and feedback. Commoning is our name for bringing that same logic into social life, practices that keep the sources of life regenerating. Commoning is also more than human. We co-manage watersheds, soils, pollinators, urban microclimates. So human thriving and ecological thriving reinforce each other. In a healthy forest, trees aren't lone entrepreneurs. I know through fungal networks, the so-called wood wide web, they share sugars and nutrients, warn each other of pests, and feed seedlings in the shade. All trees bankroll the young. The species trade what they have in surplus for what they lack. Nothing here is free for all. There are limits and feedbacks. When a tree is stressed, flows change. When the canopy opens, the mix of species shift. That's commoning, reciprocity, repair, rules that arise from living systems itself. On a coral reef, waste is food. I know corals host algae that turn sunlight into energy. Tiny, cleaner fish pick parasites of larger fish. Polyps build a limestone architecture that shelters everyone. The reef's infrastructure, or the coral itself, is co-produced and constantly maintained. Diversity isn't decoration, it's insurance. If one link falters, other takes up the slack. That's commoning, shared building, shared upkeep, shared benefits. Think of beavers. They fell trees, slow water, spread it across a floodplain, and suddenly a whole wetland appears. New plants, insects, birds, fish. The beaver is an ecosystem engineer, but the wetland only lasts because countless species coast toward it. Roots stabilize banks, microbes clean water, willows regrow. That's commoning, creating commons and then caring for them. Even your microbiome is a lesson. Trillions of microbes digest food, train your immune system, and keep pathogens in check. Balance matters. If one species overruns the rest, you get sick. Health comes from coordination, not domination. That's commoning. Many actors following shared protocols for mutual flourishing. So when we say commoning, we mean a living process that mirrors how life sustains itself. Reciprocity instead of extraction, limits and feedbacks instead of take all you can, uh, maintenance and repair as everyday work, diversity and mutations so the system is resilient, shared infrastructures, gardens, code bases, water basins, clinics that people co-produce and co-govern, and a time horizon that includes the next generation. Put in one line, commoning is how we organize to keep the conditions of life regenerating. Together with the consensus-based decided rules, responsibilities we share, and benefits that cycle back to the places that made them possible. And it is relational and processual, planting and repairing, sharing skills, resolving conflicts, welcoming newcomers, setting fair limits, monitoring use, and adjusting when conditions change. Seen this way, the examples widen. From the quiet commoning of care, neighborhood kitchens, time banks, cooperative childcare, to open source knowledge, community energy public banks with mission charters and municipal housing protected from speculation. The pattern is simple, designed for enough for everyone for the long term. Instead of extracting maximum short-term gains, commoning builds regenerative capacity, trust, skills, institutions, habitats that make tomorrow possible. With that broader lens in place, we can now map the main sources of true value and then see how capital systematically twists each one to turn them into its own sources of fetish value, a process we call decommonization, which is the core feature of what capital is. To understand how capital perverts the sources of true value into sources of fetish value, the theory says we need a deeper framework than just economics. It draws on Aristotle's four causes. It might sound a bit academic, but it is a powerful lens that helps identify the four fundamental sources, the commoning causes of true value, as we call them, that capital perverts or destroys. Simply put, according to Aristotle, when anything comes into being, we can ask four plain questions. Who or what does the making? Aristotle would call that the efficient cause. What is it made of? The material cause. What pattern or rule organize it? The formal cause. And what is it for? The final cause. Think of a community garden. Neighbors and the rest of living beings with agency make it. Fertile soil and water compose it. Shared norms organize it. And the purpose is nourishment and care. So, or think of a city that flips its water systems into mission-locked public common utility, Workers, users, indigenous custodians, the river guardians do the making, the efficient cause. The watershed, aquifers, pipes and pumps and energy composite, the material cause. A binding charter, multi-stakeholder governance, lifeline tariffs, and river health triggers organize it, the formal cause, and the purpose is universal access and watershed regeneration, not dividends, as the final cause. So this sounds like a four-part story. Four ways true value works, and four ways capitalism tries to appropriate and pervert the four sources of true value into the sources of fetish value. Now, let me draw on some examples from food or agriculture sector to make these ideas a little bit more sensible, hopefully. Now, let's start with the first cause, the efficient cause. Now, usually in standard economics, that just means human labor and machines, right? But our framework redefines it as human and more than human creativity or creative power, if you wish. This sounds like a big shift, right? Because it recognizes the active co-creative role of everything. It is not just the farmer doing the work, it's the soil microbes, the water cycle, the plants themselves, the biodiversity, you name it. The whole environment is an active participant. Value is generated with nature, not extracted from it. It's collaborative, not dominant or simple source extraction. Think about, regenerative agriculture, things like agroforestry, no-till farming, rotational grazing, if they happen independent of capitalist relations on a communist or commoning state of living. These aren't just about doing less harm. They're actively trying to harness the ecosystem's own power, its own creativity to restore things like soil health. The farmer or laborers and the land are like co-workers, co-efficient causes, as I would put it in the framework. So we can also point to indigenous land stewardship here in Australia as a system deeply rooted in this principle. Think about, practices like cultural burning. Fire isn't just seen as a tool to control, nor is it a land just a passive resource. They're seen as active, creative partners. Humans are part of that regenerative process by working with the elements. The priority is ecological balance and long-term well-being, not just next quarter's yield. Now, capitalism takes our beautiful collaborative creativity seen in community food growing with its rich mix of generational knowledge, land care, and relationships, and turns it into a tool against us through a process I call primary abstraction. This strips away the human and ecological agency by reducing them to objects and commodities. As an example, our grandmothers' shared recipes become patented as intellectual property owned by a corporation. Thus, a Creative Commons is transformed into a price good. Similarly, your ability to innovate and care is boiled down to measurable labor, which is a unit exploited for profit rather than exercised and celebrated as human potential. This plays out starkly in our food systems. Agribusiness de-skills farmers by replacing their initiative land stewardship with a proprietary software and patented seeds, even limiting tractor repairs. Corporations steal communal seed innovations. They patent them to charge communities for their own heritage. Food culture shifts to social media content. Likes are valued over nourishment, and farm workers, often migrants, are reduced to the cheapest seasonal labor while their skills and dignity are ignored. Even green innovation gets co-opted into greenwashing by redirecting creative efforts to polish a broken extractive system rather than fix it. So the result, Capitalism captures our more than human collective creative power, our capacity for common good into a commodity called labor, and then employs it into profit-driven extraction process. Despite this, that potential remains locked in our food producers' wisdom, their skills and community innovations, waiting to be reclaimed from a system that mislabels exploitation as progress or productivity. We must restore the relationships, agency, creativity that truly sustains our food systems and their ecological settings. Now, this alienation leads us to the second cause. If the efficient cause is about how value is created and by whom, the material cause is about what, the actual substance of life. We call this livability. An interesting term, I believe, because it sounds active, healthy, not just resources. It emphasizes the conditions that sustain life. Healthy soil, clean water, biodiversity. It's about the whole system operating in a regenerative way. When managed as a commons, think traditional commons and modern examples like eco-villages or some cooperatives, the goal is long-term system health and resilience, not short-term exploitation. But capitalism, while it reduces livability to what we may call mechanical nature, it takes the life out of it. It abstracts and simplifies everything. Soil isn't a living ecosystem anymore. It's just dirt, a medium for NPK fertilizers. Water isn't lifeblood or watershed. It's cubic meters and an input that can be bought and sold. We see this starkly here in Australia with cases like the case of the Murray-Darling Basin. Water there has increasingly been transformed into a financial asset, water rights traded like stocks. And once water becomes this abstract financial commodity, its actual ecological necessity, keeping rivers flowing, supporting wildlife, enabling farming communities, gets sidelined or completely ignored if the financial incentive points elsewhere. The living material cause becomes a tradable security, and that just erodes the resilience of the entire system. So the creative process is alienated. The material base is mechanized and degraded. The connections are breaking down everywhere, which brings us to the third cause, the formal cause. This is about the organizing structure, the shape of life board or the so-called web of life. For true value, the organizing principle is conviviality, living well together. It is a structure built on care, on shared responsibility, on recognizing the deep interdependence between humans and the rest of nature, or on more than human solidarity. It's deeply relational. Agency isn't just individual, it's collective, focused on mutual support and regeneration. What does a convivial structure actually look like, we may ask? Think about community land trusts like Ceres Community Environment Park, where the land isn't privately owned but held in common, forcing shared responsibility and long-term thinking. Or look at permaculture networks. They're explicitly built on principles like care for the earth, care for the people, fair share. That's a convivial structure. And again, indigenous land stewardship is perhaps the most holistic example. Decision-making isn't typically top-down or purely profit-driven. It's embedded in a much broader relational web of mutual dependence and collective responsibility. Care is the management structure. Now, contrast that with capitalist formal structure. They are designed for different ends. efficiency, hierarchy, competition, market exchanges, monopolies and oligopolies, control, algorithmic management, and ultimately profit. And this structure inevitably creates what we may term the consumer-producer rift. That's the massive gap between where food comes from and where we buy and consume it and dump its waste. You just see products on a shelf, standardized, priced, totally anonymous. That's the rift in action. The market relations, the long supply chains, they atomize us. The consumers is utterly disconnected from the farmer, the land, the water, the exploitative and extractivist relations behind the food. And this structure actively prevents conviviality. It destroys it. It displaces care with cost efficiency. The system is almost designed to stop us from having that relational understanding, because that understanding might challenge the price or the methods. Now, this brings us to the final piece, the final cause, the ultimate purpose. For capitalism, this is pretty fixed. Profit maximization, wealth accumulation, and control over valued dictation and extraction. But for true value, the aim is much broader, holistic well-living. And crucially, this isn't a static state. It's realized through a mechanism we call alterity. Now, alterity might be a new term for you. It's maybe the most crucial or critical part of understanding how true value systems could actually survive and thrive. If the first three causes describe the system's what and how, alterity is the engine that keeps it going. It's this continuous, adaptive, almost self-correcting force that makes sure that the other three causes are well aligned enough to realize the purpose or achieve the end goal, which is the well-living of the whole community. So it allows the community practicing true value to constantly reflect, to adapt, to reconfigure itself, specifically to resist the pressures of capitalism trying to co-opt it or colonize its resources. Well-living isn't just a goal you reach. It's something you have to continually fight for and adapt to maintain. Alterity is that ongoing process of adaptation, regeneration, resistance, and sometimes rebellion. Where do we see alterity in action? Well, internally within a community, it looks like constant learning and self-reflection about, are our practices really regenerative? Are they equitable? Or are we unintentionally letting market logic or patriarchal, racist, and other discriminatory tendencies creep back in? Externally, alterity is about actively resisting encroachment and expanding the commonist way of living. Think again about the Murray-Darling Basin. Alterity is the grassroots organizing, the legal challenges, the community efforts fighting to reclaim water rights, to stop resources being locked away by corporate interests. It's like the immune system of the commons. It fights off infection, the infection being co-option and suppression by the dominant system. Now, this brings us to maybe the biggest challenge. If true value ideas like regenerative farming or local food system or agroecology become popular, capitalism immediately tries to absorb them. That's the constant battle. Capitalism is incredibly adept at taking what we may call prefigurative actions, those steps towards true value, and integrating them without fundamentally changing its own exploitative logic. Let's think of food production cooperatives, especially farmer-owned ones. These are places where people come together to grow, share, and create value in a way that's fair and sustainable. But here's the catch. they face a huge challenge, being pulled back into the capitalist system, which can limit their power to truly change things. These cooperatives are all about reclaiming our creative agency, the human spark that makes us innovative and caring. In a worker-owned co-op, ideally speaking, everyone has a say, turning work into a shared joyful act, rather than a grind for someone else's profit. They also build conviviality, yes, that sense of living well together through mutual support and care, like community land trust and permaculture networks. These are real examples of people taking back control and creating true value. But here's where it gets tough. To survive, cooperatives often have to, play by capitalism's rules, competing, marketing, and even mimicking big business. Take the CBH Group in Australia, a giant grain co-op owned by farmers, raking in billions and dominating exports. It's successful, sure, but it's also locked into the profit game, which can dilute its original purpose. Similar efforts like Food Connect in Brisbane or Ceres in Melbourne focus on fair food systems and local side, yet they struggle to compete with supermarket giants like Woolworths and Coles, who control most of our grocery market. So even worker recovered co-ops in Latin America, while inspiring, yes, get tangled in the same market pressures. So what's happening? Capitalism is clever. It absorbs these good ideas without fixing its core problems. Cooperatives might offer dignity and fair wages, but they're still racing to sell in a profit-driven world. Their creativity and community spirit get reduced to just another product. Now, this incorporation turns their true value into something the system can exploit, not transform. Here is the takeaway. These cooperatives are a powerful start, but they can't do it alone. To break free from this cycle, we need to challenge the whole system, the markets, the state, the way value is defined or dictated. It's about reclaiming our creativity and care, not just for a few co-ops, but for everyone. Or think about greenwashing. An agribusiness gets a sustainability certification, maybe invest in some carbon offsets, polishes its brand image, whereas the core business model might still rely on monocultures, exploited labor, or massive water use. The green label neutralizes the challenge without demanding real systemic change. So Alterity isn't just about doing sustainable things. It demands that these actions actually expand the sides of commoning, that they challenge power structures, that they fundamentally recognize reorganize governance away from pure profit. It's about constant vigilance and active struggle against co-option. So putting it all together, Communist value theory is about showing us how capitalism takes the good things we create together, our creativity, our communities, our planet's health, and our dreams for the future, and twist them into something that benefits only a few. We call this decommonization. If decommonization is the core nature of capital, then recommonization is the way out of it, which means turning it all back into an organic socio-ecological formation that works for everyone through commoning. And this is not limited to shared resources, but rather includes every social institution, including the state and the market. Recommonization isn't about patching up capitalism with small fixes. It's about building a whole new way of living where life-affirming values like health, community, and creativity come first. There are already many struggles in this direction. Open source seed commons and agroecology schools reclaim creativity. Regenerative farming restores soil and water as living commons. Community-supported agriculture and food hubs rebuild our bonds. And food sovereignty movements redefined food's purpose as well-living, not endless profit. These efforts prove we're not just dreaming, we're building a better food system step by step with care and sustainability at its heart. But why, despite such great efforts and struggles going on for decades, does capital continue to enjoy its destructive dominance more than ever? Or, in other words, how can we build an overarching movement for a full systemic transformation out of this pluriverse of recommonizing efforts? Well, I believe we need to build power from ground up while simultaneously creating new political vehicles that can translate that power into law. Think of it like this. One hand builds alternatives in everyday life, worker co-ops, community land trusts, mutual aid networks, renewable energy cooperatives, etc., etc. The other hand reaches for constitutional and legislative power to protect scale, and lock in these alternatives. Neither hand works without the other. Grassroots alternatives alone aren't enough. We need political power to protect them from being crushed, to scale them up, and to dismantle the legal structures that favor corporations over communities, fetish value over true value. This means building new political parties or movements not as vote-getting machines that say whatever polls well up, but as genuine expressions of these grassroots alternatives. These formations need to contest elections and push for constitutional and legislative changes with a clear program to help transition the capitalist state, market, and society to their communist versions. As just a few examples of such transitional measures, we may think of the following. Number one, constitutional mandate for alterity. Amend constitutions to prioritize ecological regeneration, intergenerational justice, and collective well-living as the supreme purpose of the state and all entities, overriding profit accumulation. Number two, participatory democracy. Institutionalize deliberative governance, devolving authority over local commons to bioregional assemblies and councils, mandate role rotation and term limits to prevent hierarchies. Number three, economic democracy and worker control. Mandate worker ownership and democratic management of enterprises above a minimum size, reclaiming creativity from alienated labor. Now, number four, rights of nature and de-reification. Grant legal personhood and inherent rights to ecosystems like rivers, forests, soils, transforming them from passive resources into active subjects of governance. This counters extractivism and supports regenerative practices like shared water or soil commons. Number five, land back and deprivatization. Rematriate ancestral lands to indigenous nations with full sovereignty, restoring traditional stewardship, deprivatize essential infrastructures like water, energy, grids under democratic community control as inalienable commons. Number six, decommodification of essentials. Guarantee universal access to housing, food, water, energy, and healthcare as inalienable rights, removing them from speculative markets to secure basic existence and reduce precarity. Number seven, abolition of intellectual property. Repeal patents, copyrights, and trademarks. establish open source commons for knowledge, technology, and genetic resources like seeds to liberate more than human creativity for public benefit. Number 8, prohibition on financialization. Ban treatment of land, housing, and natural resources as speculative assets or derivatives to prevent the colonization of the future. Number 9, eradicate corporate domination. Abolish large corporations entirely by redistributing their assets to worker cooperatives and democratically run public enterprises, with strict caps on market influence across vital sectors like food, retail, energy, media, and digital platforms. Strict charters from all enterprises perpetrating manipulative, exploitative, extractivist, and domineering acts or causing socio-ecological harms. Number 10, solidarity exchange and public finance. Fund mutual credit systems and solidarity platform for needs-based exchange. Create public banks to restore common enterprises, to redefine procurement to favor true value over profit. Throughout this, nonviolent disruption is essential. Strikes, both workplace and rent strikes. Boycotts and divestment campaigns. Mass non-cooperation. Occupations of land and housing when rights are violated. These tactics aren't just about making noise. They reveal how much the system depends on our cooperation. They create crises that force negotiations. They open legislative windows. The new political formations or the political arm of grassroots alternatives then translate these openings into permanent legal gains. When we might ask what victory would look like in this context, one of the goals of taking such transitional measures is to transform and make the state itself into a partner in building the commons, not a servant of corporate power. Instead of subsidizing factory farms, it funds community food hubs. Instead of granting patents, it supports open source platforms. Instead of managing unemployment, it helps workers take their companies and run them democratically. We're not trying to seize the state and command the economy from above. We're trying to transform the state into a framework that enables and protects thousands of self-governing communities and enterprises organized around genuine needs and ecological limits. Counter-hegemony, which means challenging the dominant system, becomes credible when people can point to the schools, clinics, farms, energy co-ops, and democratic assemblies that already work better than what we have now. When your neighbors and your next generation are part of a housing co-op with secure, affordable homes. When the local energy grid is owned by the community and rates are set democratically. When food comes from regional networks of regenerative organic farms rather than industrial monocultures. That's when people stop thinking that there is no alternative and start thinking we are already building it. We are the alternatives. This is how we wage the decisive battle over what society should value. We start by creating institutions that produce real well-living. We scale them through protective laws, and we culminate in a constitutional transformation that makes well-living together and ecological regeneration the supreme law of the land. It is not a shortcut. It's not easy, of course, but it's the only strategy that actually matches the scale of transformation we need. And the beautiful part is already begun. It needs to be scaled up through forming political movements and to be treated as an urgency, since we don't have much time left. The question is, are we ready to be part of it? Thank you for your patience, and I will be looking forward to having your comments and questions. All the best.